The way humans perceive light is through the movement of photons received by photoreceptors in our eyes, which creates an electrical signal to the brain in recognition of what the human eyes see. Human perception, however amazing it is, has flaws. These flaws can be manipulated by very talented artists through the use of color and the light that is absorbed or bounces off the imagery to be received by our brain to interpret or even misinterpret. Artists' skilled use of color and depiction of light allow them to create imagery that acts as a window to the artist's vision, which is then transferred into a medium such as painting, allowing others to take a peek into the artist's perception, which is human like its audience. Impressionism makes use of our brain's ability to process bits and pieces of color and form it into a whole image while also evoking the feelings of softness through the use of textures. Among the artists of the Impressionist movement, Claude Monet in particular revolutionized the use of pastels as well in his works, which seem to create a beautiful relationship between humans and the natural world using such short brushstrokes. In his work, which I was able to see firsthand at the Hammer Museum in Westwood, California, titled View of Bordighera, Monet paints a landscape of the small coastal Italian city in pastels with contrasting dark and softened details for shadow. According to the Hammer Museum, Claude Monet's task of painting the intricate foliage was a difficult one. As an artist whose subjects were typically more solitary and singular, Bordighera was a place with immensely thick vegetation to the point where framing and the intricacies of detail were time-consuming to Monet. This was detailed in a letter to his future wife, Alice Hawshed. The lighting was also a major issue. According to a letter from Claude Monet to sculptor Auguste Rodin, Monet was fencing, wrestling with the sun, in reference to the difficulty in how to translate nature's Mediterranean sun into his painting using his perceptive skills as an artist. This translation of what Monet saw in the landscape of Bordighera demonstrates the marriage of human love of nature interpreted through art and the visual system's perception. The beauty that Monet envisioned arrived in the form of dense, layered brushstrokes, incredibly minuscule dots, and the warmth of tone of color. It can be easy to interpret the painting as a whole, but in order to truly appreciate the work put into this painting by Monet, it is important that one looks at the tremendous amount of detail in each stroke. Each color was painstakingly mixed and chosen to complement and translate not only the emotions Monet intended to evoke, but the actual sight of the land he painted. One can very easily walk into the woods and appreciate this in real time, but Monet crafted what feels to be a love letter towards the sceneries he painted, allowing others to appreciate the journey into nature just as he had. In order to understand the mathematics and science within art, it is important to break down the basics. As much as historical and current artists play with and control aspects of imagery to convey a motif, the audience of this art can be completely oblivious to the visual skill in each artist need to convey not only the subject they are trying to translate, but to do so in a way that adds their personal style to it. Within the natural world, light seems to move and bounce off of objects, but an artist may choose to interpret the lighting in a more contrasted way, or not at all in many cases of abstract and contemporary art. If we were to interpret shades of shadow and how they move within the natural world, there are amazing ways in which we can force our own minds to see what we want them to see. Bridget Riley, among the op art movement, found fascination in the subject of how humans can perceive art through this manipulation of shapes, color, and gradients. In her work, Squares in Motion, Riley chooses black and white squares to create a flat plane starting on both left and right sides. As the plane nears the center, the squares give the illusion of dipping backwards, past the actual flat plane of the canvas. This is done using an optical technique in which she squeezes the squares thinner towards the center. The reason this illusion is achieved is because of the way the visual system works. In natural circumstances, items in the distance get smaller and distort thinner as they get further. By painting these squares smaller towards the center, she forces the brain to see the whole image as though it has sunken backward in the area where the squares get thinner. Although this work was unavailable in the Los Angeles area, it was fortunate that the Hammer Museum was hosting an exhibition honoring her drawings, which in my personal opinion allow an even closer look to what Riley was trying to achieve in her studies of the original painting for Squares in Motion. The exhibit in its entirety was her journey through art, which seemed to mimic the act of deconstructing art and many aspects of human visual perception itself. This does not come as a surprise since the era of her artistry also happened to be one of scientific revolution. The 1960s brought out many curious thinkers to explore the inner workings of the human mind and which ways we can disrupt and enhance our senses. Riley deliberately brings us back to the basics in order to break down how humans view art, which forces us to look closer into detail. She can feel the gravity that folds the cloth between Christ's thighs and holds the fabric which wraps the target of his scourge, writes Angus Stewart of The Artist in RSA Journal. Knowing the basics in depicting light, shadow, shapes, and their contrasts and similarities as they pertain to nature and how they are received in the human brain changes how we interpret what we see, allowing for a deeper, richer view of the human experience envisioned in art. Monet's work is dedicated to bringing the beauty of nature to the observer. Bridget Riley's work in general can be seen as a mechanism dedicated towards an appreciation and analysis towards the arts. Each artist in their own right are masters of manipulation, in that Monet manipulates the viewer into an appreciation of the beauty of nature in isolation, as Riley forces her audience to acknowledge their own visual skills in order to bring awareness to detail in not only her own art, but others as well. These skills are excellent examples that show how human perception in viewing art allows itself to be enthralled in the brain's interpretation of imagery.